Welcome to this tutorial on pre-launch readiness and strategic planning by Medical Affairs. In this session, we'll explore how medical affairs plays a foundational role in the success of pharmaceutical product launches. You'll learn why medical affairs should be involved early, much earlier than most people assume, and how their contributions shape the clinical, regulatory, and commercial trajectory of a product. This tutorial is designed to guide you through the timeline, strategy, and practical steps medical affairs professionals must take to prepare the ground well before the launch day. Let's begin by addressing a fundamental and often misunderstood question. When should medical affairs truly start contributing to a product launch? Most people outside medical affairs might assume their role begins right before regulatory approval, or maybe a few months ahead of commercial rollout. But that's far too late. Medical affairs involvement should ideally begin at the end of phase 1 or the beginning of phase 2 of the clinical development process. Why so early? Because this is when medical can start adding strategic value that has long-term impact. When medical joins the team early, they bring a scientific lens to trial design. They can help shape protocols that aren't just scientifically sound, but clinically relevant. That means designing endpoints that actually matter to real-world clinicians and to patients. This early phase also allows medical affairs to study the evolving therapeutic landscape. What are the unmet needs? What are the treatment gaps? Who are the current players, and what insights are they missing? Understanding these dynamics early enables the team to think ahead about how this new product will fit, not just in clinical guidelines, but into actual daily medical practice. It's also the right time to begin initial stakeholder identification. Even at this stage, medical affairs can begin to outline who the key opinion leaders might be, what educational gaps exist, and how to tailor messaging that addresses real scientific and clinical questions. Early involvement sets the tone for a proactive, not reactive, launch. And in a competitive pharmaceutical environment, that difference can define the success or failure of the entire launch strategy. So, if there's one message to take from this slide, it's this. Medical affairs, launch readiness, doesn't begin when the product is ready to hit the market. It begins when the data starts to take shape, at the end of phase 1. This is how medical affairs earns its place as a strategic partner, not just a support function. So, how should the medical affairs contribution look like at the very beginning? Strategic planning doesn't start with tactics. It starts with insight. Deep, meaningful strategic insight. Medical affairs teams must begin with a comprehensive understanding of the disease area. This means more than just memorizing prevalence rates or treatment guidelines. It means immersing yourself in the patient experience. How are patients diagnosed? What barriers exist in their treatment journeys? What are their pain points? What's currently missing in their care? Then, we examine the current treatment landscape. What therapies are already available? How effective are they? Where do they fall short? Are new competitors expected to enter the market? By analyzing both the strengths and weaknesses of current options, we start to define where our new product could bring real value. It's also essential to consider the competitive landscape. Which companies are developing similar products? How far along are they? What's their messaging? What's their scientific evidence base? This analysis helps position your product strategically and guides the scientific narrative that medical affairs will support. This work isn't just about collecting information, it's about building a foundation. This foundation informs the rest of your medical affairs strategy, from stakeholder engagement to scientific messaging to internal alignment. When medical affairs teams thoroughly understand the disease and competitive environment early on, they become more than a source of information. They become strategic advisors who help shape how the product is developed, presented, and eventually received by the healthcare system. Once you've built a strong understanding of the disease and the competitive space, it's time to translate that insight into clear objectives. But here's where many teams go wrong. They jump straight into activity planning. Instead, medical affairs must first ask, what are we trying to achieve, and how does that support the broader business and patient goals? Medical affairs doesn't operate in a vacuum. It must align its strategic goals with the larger corporate objectives, whether that's establishing a new standard of care, driving early market awareness, or supporting pricing and reimbursement strategies. Medical objectives need to be a thread in that bigger tapestry. So, what does that alignment look like in practice? For instance, if the organization's goal is to secure market leadership in a specific therapeutic area, medical affairs might prioritize activities that strengthen scientific credibility, such as publishing pivotal data or building early consensus through advisory boards. But alignment is just the beginning. You also need to make those objectives measurable. It's not enough to say build awareness or engage stakeholders. You have to set KPIs. How many touch points? What kind of feedback are you expecting? What change in perception or behavior are you aiming for? And finally, prioritize. Not everything can be done at once. What's most critical for success at this phase? What supports the launch timeline and addresses the biggest gaps? These are the questions that transform a list of ideas into a strategic roadmap. By defining clear, aligned, and prioritized objectives early, medical affairs positions itself as a forward-thinking function, one that doesn't just react to the launch, but actively shapes it. Let's move into another critical building block of pre-launch success: stakeholder mapping and early engagement. Here's the truth. The success of a product launch doesn't just hinge on the data or the strength of your internal strategy. It heavily depends on how well you've mapped out and engaged the people who will either support or challenge your product's journey to market. So first, identify and prioritize your stakeholders early. These are not just the usual suspects like healthcare professionals and payers. You need to include patient advocacy groups, regulatory authorities, internal colleagues from market access and commercial, and even potential detractors. Ask, who has the power to influence this product's adoption, access, or perception? Or, next, understand their needs, expectations, and influence. What are they looking for from a new product? What are their concerns? What value do they need to see? This is where medical affairs shines, because you're uniquely positioned to have scientific, credible, and meaningful conversations with every one of these groups. Once you understand those expectations, you build tailored engagement plans. That means choosing the right messages, the right channels, and the right timing for each group. It's not one size fits all. KOLs may respond to advisory boards or peer-reviewed data, while payers might want health economics evidence and real-world outcomes. Regulatory bodies need data that's structured, consistent, and compliant. And patients, they want clarity and trust. The most critical message here: don't wait. Start engagement before product approval. Build relationships early, gain insights, test messages, and lay the groundwork for post-approval collaboration. By the time you launch, these stakeholders should not be hearing from you for the first time. They should already be part of the journey. This kind of stakeholder engagement is not a checkbox. It's a continuous, dynamic relationship. And when you do it right, medical affairs becomes the bridge between science and the people who rely on it. With stakeholder mapping underway, the next strategic pillar is scientific communication. And this too must begin long before launch day. The role of medical affairs is to lay the scientific foundation that supports the product's credibility, value, and real-world use. and that foundation is built through publications and education. Let's begin with the publication strategy. This isn't something you leave until the product is approved. You need to plan it early, during the pre-launch phase. Ask, what data will be published? When? In which journals? Who will author the papers? Your goal is to ensure a consistent and credible scientific story is in the public domain, ready to support the launch and answer stakeholder questions. Then there's educational material development. These aren't just sales slides. They're scientific resources designed to help healthcare professionals understand the product's mechanism of action, efficacy, safety, and how it fits into clinical practice. And don't forget patients. Patient-focused education is equally important because informed patients are empowered and they ask better questions. So what makes good educational content? It's clear, it's evidence-based, and most importantly, it's aligned with what stakeholders care about. Your materials must effectively communicate benefits, risks, and usage in ways that are both scientifically robust and easy to understand. Why is this so critical before the commercial push begins? Because scientific credibility must be established first. If medical affairs doesn't lead with data and education, the product risks being seen only through a commercial lens, and that undermines trust. So, as a takeaway, start building your scientific communication plan early, make sure it's tailored to your audiences, and use it to establish the credibility that will carry your product through its launch and beyond. Once your scientific communication plan is underway, the next major focus is stakeholder engagement. And here's where medical affairs can shine like no other function. So what exactly does stakeholder mapping and engagement mean in the pre-launch phase? It means identifying, understanding, and connecting with the individuals and groups who will influence or be impacted by the product's entry into the market. These include key opinion leaders, healthcare professionals, payers, patient advocacy groups, regulators, and even internal stakeholders like commercial and regulatory teams. The first step is identification. Who are the influencers in your therapeutic area? Which HCPs have a voice in shaping practice guidelines? Which patient groups are vocal advocates? You're building a map of influence, not just a list of names. Then comes understanding their needs, roles, and expectations. What do these stakeholders care about? What challenges do they face in clinical practice or reimbursement? What concerns might they have about a new product? This insight is critical. It allows you to engage not just with information, but with relevance. Now you're ready to tailor your engagement plans. This is not one size fits all. A scientific publication might be perfect for KOLs, while patient advocacy groups may respond better to roundtables or infographics. Regulatory stakeholders may need structured briefings or access to background data. And the golden rule here is engage through scientific exchange, not promotional messaging. Medical affairs builds trust by offering value, sharing data, facilitating education, and being a responsive, credible partner. This is how long-term relationships are formed. And it's these relationships that support not just launch success, but the product's life cycle far beyond it. So to sum it up, start stakeholder mapping early, go deep in understanding what matters to each group, and engage in ways that are authentic, valuable, and scientifically grounded. This is how medical affairs earns influence and builds a foundation for meaningful impact. Now let's move to a critical element of launch readiness: scientific communication. Medical affairs teams often get pulled into content development closer to launch, but to truly shape perception and drive understanding, this work needs to begin much earlier. So, what should a scientific communication plan look like during the pre-launch phase? First, you need a publication strategy, not just a few posters at a congress, but a timeline of peer-reviewed articles, abstracts, and presentations that build credibility and anticipation for the new product. These publications should address real clinical questions, highlight unmet needs, and start positioning your product as a solution, even before it's available. Next, there's educational content development. This includes slide decks, brochures, infographics, explainer videos, and more. But here's the key. Every piece of content must be evidence-based, accurate, and tailored to the audience. For healthcare professionals, that might mean focusing on mechanism of action, trial results, and comparative data. For patients, it means simplifying the language while still communicating benefits, risks, and how the treatment fits into their journey. Medical affairs also plays a strategic role in shaping the narrative. You're not just sharing data. You're telling a story grounded in science. This is your opportunity to communicate why this product matters, what problem it solves, and how it contributes to better outcomes. And don't forget timing. Publications and materials must be ready before the product hits the market, so stakeholders already feel informed and confident. This advanced preparation builds momentum and avoids reactive scrambling. So, if you're wondering when to start creating scientific content, the answer is yesterday. Because if you wait until launch, you're already too late. Pre-launch scientific communication isn't just helpful. It's essential to create a credible, data-driven presence in the market from day one. What about the clinical development component and the growing importance of real-world evidence in pre-launch planning? Medical affairs should not passively wait for clinical trial results to arrive. They must actively engage in supporting ongoing trials, especially pivotal phase 3 studies, by offering scientific and clinical insights that ensure the trials answer relevant questions. This means helping design protocols that reflect actual clinical practice, providing guidance on endpoint selection, and flagging early signs of unmet medical needs. But it doesn't stop there. Medical affairs must begin planning post-launch studies well in advance. We're talking about real-world evidence generation, observational studies, registry development, and potentially even phase 4 trials. These aren't nice-to-haves. They're strategic tools that will be critical for payers, healthcare professionals, and regulatory bodies in the years following launch. The key here is alignment. The data you generate must be meaningful for stakeholders. What do payers need to see in terms of cost effectiveness or patient outcomes? What data do healthcare professionals require to feel confident in adopting this new therapy? These questions must guide your evidence generation plan. Remember, real-world data carries growing influence. It can sway market access decisions, influence guidelines, and support ongoing medical education long after the randomized clinical trials are over. So don't treat post-launch evidence generation as a future problem. It's a now problem. Planning for real-world evidence must start during the pre-launch phase, because without it, your product's long-term success could be compromised. Strategic data generation isn't just about research. It's about shaping the entire narrative around your product in a way that resonates with science, payers, regulators, and most importantly, patients. As the product nears its launch date, the focus of medical affairs shifts toward ensuring that everything from messaging to evidence generation is ready for regulatory, reimbursement, and market access success. Let's start with regulatory compliance. Every piece of scientific and promotional content that's developed before the launch must comply with strict regulatory guidelines. That includes slide decks, brochures, scientific publications, and even internal training materials. Medical affairs plays a critical role here, not just in writing and reviewing content, but in ensuring that all communication is scientifically accurate, balanced, and compliant with the laws and industry codes. Then there's the topic of health economics and outcomes research, or HEOR. This is a domain that has become increasingly important for market access. Why? Because decision makers like payers, hospital systems, and even regulators are demanding more than clinical data. They want to know whether this product offers value. Does it improve outcomes? Does it reduce hospital stays? Can it save money in the long run? That's why medical affairs, working closely with the HEOR teams, must help develop or communicate real-world data and economic models that support the product's reimbursement value. This includes outcome studies, cost-effectiveness analyses, and burden of illness data that build the case for why this product deserves to be funded. Market access strategy must be fully aligned with medical input. Medical affairs brings the evidence and the scientific rationale, while market access translates that into pricing, reimbursement, and formulary success. Lastly, medical affairs should be fully prepared for regulatory interactions, especially during the review and immediately post-approval. Medical teams must anticipate potential questions from regulatory agencies and ensure that all supporting data, including safety and efficacy narratives, are ready and accessible. As the pre-launch phase intensifies, one area medical affairs cannot afford to overlook is internal alignment and training. It starts with aligning strategies across departments. Medical affairs, commercial, regulatory, and market access must all be rowing in the same direction. That means sharing the same scientific story, understanding the product's value proposition, and knowing how their individual strategies feed into a cohesive launch plan. This alignment doesn't just happen naturally, it must be orchestrated. That's why cross-functional collaboration is key. Medical affairs should regularly sit with colleagues from other departments to review scientific messaging, customer insights, and timelines. The goal is to ensure that everyone speaks with one voice when the product enters the market. But collaboration alone is not enough. You also need training, and it should start early. Medical affairs teams should begin educating internal teams, especially those in customer-facing roles, on the scientific rationale, clinical evidence, and unmet medical needs the product addresses. When commercial teams and customer service agents understand the clinical value deeply, they are more effective in the field and far less likely to deliver misaligned or non-compliant messaging. And this training isn't a one-time session. It's an ongoing process. As new data emerges and regulatory feedback is received, medical must continuously update internal teams to ensure they remain current and accurate in their communications. So, if you want a launch that is both impactful and sustainable, don't underestimate the power of internal alignment and training. It's not a supporting function, it's a strategic necessity. Let's take a moment to focus on what is arguably the most critical component of any successful launch strategy: evidence generation. Now, you might be thinking, didn't we already touch on real-world data and health outcomes earlier? Yes, but evidence generation deserves a slide of its own, because this is not just a checkbox in the process. It's the cornerstone. It's the difference between a product that launches with scientific credibility and clinical acceptance, and one that fades into obscurity because it fails to build confidence in the real world. So, what does medical affairs need to do? First, lead the evidence generation strategy early. We're talking pre-launch, ideally starting even before phase 3. At this stage, medical affairs should be identifying critical data gaps. What's missing from the pivotal trials? Are there unanswered questions about patient subgroups, about long-term safety, about health economics? These gaps must be addressed through a proactive, intentional plan. That might include observational studies, registry data, expanded access programs, or even investigator-initiated trials. This is also where real-world evidence, RWE, comes in. showing how the product performs outside of the controlled environment of a clinical trial. And trust me, payers, physicians, and health authorities are all looking for this kind of data. This work isn't just academic, it directly impacts product adoption, reimbursement, and patient outcomes. It builds the scientific credibility that Cowles will talk about, that payers will base decisions on, and that prescribers will trust. So here's the key message. Evidence generation is not optional. It's not a luxury. It's the foundation. It's how medical affairs proves the value of the product and ensures it doesn't just get launched, but thrives in the real world. Now that we've established the importance of evidence generation, let's break it down. Because not all evidence is created equal, and medical affairs must be deliberate about which types of studies to conduct and why. Let's start with real-world evidence, RWE. This is one of the most powerful tools in your arsenal. Why? Because RWE shows how the product performs in everyday clinical settings, not in the controlled, idealized environment of a randomized trial, but in the messy, real-world complexity of diverse patients, comorbidities, and variable practice settings. RWE can come from observational studies, patient registries, electronic health records, or even claims data. It helps answer questions like, how does the product perform in older patients, in those with renal impairment? Does it reduce hospitalizations or lower total healthcare costs? These are the kinds of questions payers ask, and RWE helps answer them. Then we have investigator-initiated studies, IIS. These are often driven by academic researchers, but supported by medical affairs. And they allow us to explore niche questions, subgroup data, or comparative studies that build depth in scientific understanding. Expanded access programs and compassionate use studies also play a role. They allow early access for patients in need, while simultaneously generating safety data and real-world insights. And let's not forget health economics and outcomes research, HEOR. These studies tie the clinical outcomes to cost effectiveness, budget impact, and quality of life measures, critical for market access teams and payer negotiations. The key here is intentionality. Don't run studies just to fill your publication calendar. Design them strategically to answer specific questions that matter to KOLs, HCPs, payers, regulators, and most importantly, patients. This suite of evidence, RWE, HEOR, IIS, and more, isn't a post-launch afterthought. It's a launch enabler. Medical affairs is uniquely positioned to lead these efforts because we understand the science, the stakeholder needs, and the long-term vision. So if you want to drive successful adoption, access, and real-world performance, build your evidence engine early and build it to last. As we wrap up this tutorial, let's bring everything back into focus. We've walked through the early timing of medical affairs involvement, starting as early as the end of Phase 1 or Phase 2. We've emphasized the need to understand the disease landscape, set clear and aligned objectives, and engage stakeholders with tailored strategies. We also highlighted how evidence generation, especially real-world evidence and strategic studies, forms the foundation of a successful launch. But beyond the slides, beyond the process maps, this is about mindset. Too often, pre-launch is treated as a checklist of deliverables, squeezed into the last 6 months before approval. But if there's one takeaway from this session, it's this. Pre-launch is not a phase. It's a strategy. It's how you prepare the market, the minds, and the science for a product that deserves to succeed. And with that, we'll end this session here. Thank you for your attention and see you soon.